TellyCast, the TV industry news review.
Hi, I'm Justin Crosby, and welcome to this week's TellyCast. Coming up on this week's show, award-winning journalist Kate Bulkley and A&E Networks UK's Dan Korn talk about TV's advertising crisis, the Netflix subscriber boom, M&A activity, and are Brits getting fed up with low-quality social media content? Peter White from Deadline gives us a lowdown from Hollywood on all things US TV. And I'll be speaking with K7 Media's Girts Licis on the countries around the world who are starting to reopen their TV production and how they're doing it. It's all coming up on TellyCast. So my first guests on this week's show are two recognised leaders in their field. Kate Bulkley is an award-winning business journalist and media commentator, moderates public and corporate events, is on the executive committee of the Broadcasting Press Guild and writes regularly for specialist publications including Broadcast and Digital TV Europe. And Dan Korn is Vice President of Programming and Head of History, H2 and Crime and Investigation channels at A&E Networks UK. Dan heads up a team responsible for all of the pay TV brands for the A&E UK joint venture, sourcing, acquiring and commissioning over 3,000 hours of content a year. Recent commissions include Al Murray's Why Does Everyone Hate the English?, James Nesbitt's Disasters That Changed Britain, World War II Treasure Hunters with Suggs, and Murder Town with Catherine Kelly. Welcome to the show, guys.
Well, thanks for having me, Justin.
Thank you, Justin. Good to be here.
Dan, we'll start with you for me. You've highlighted a Netflix story as one of your key stories of the week. Talk us through that.
Well, Netflix announced its results, and they are spectacular, just extraordinary. They've added 15.77 million new customers with shows such as Tiger King and Love is Blind drawing big audience. So it's more than doubled the number of new subscribers it expected in the last 3 months, as obviously a lot more people have signed up because of COVID-19 and the lockdown and everything else. And Netflix continues to defy all expectations. So many times I've been in industry events or industry gatherings and people have said the Netflix bubble has got to implode at some point because their borrowing is so high. They're spending extraordinary sums of money, $17 billion invested in content in 2020, projected to rise to $26 billion in content by 2028. And I'm just full of admiration, really, and not a little sort of envious of their stratospheric growth. And I'm not surprised because I'm a subscriber and I watch their content, and I think that they are doing an incredible job. And I've been watching things like The Last Dance, this brilliant series with all about the Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan in the 1990s, and the Tiger King, and all these incredible things that Netflix are putting out there, and they're obviously enjoying this unprecedented success. And I'm just very intrigued to see, what now happens after lockdown and whether that stratospheric growth continues or falls off rather.
So it was interesting, wasn't it? Before the start of the year, everybody was looking forward to Disney Plus launching and perhaps thinking that, that might not necessarily be the Netflix killer, but it was potentially going to have a big impact on their growth. But that obviously hasn't been the case. And Disney Plus also recording amazing subscriber numbers. I think they passed something like 50 million a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's. I think the interesting thing is how these services are growing simultaneously. It's not one or the other. A lot of people are sort of going in for both if they can afford it. And there's clearly big enough constituencies to support both. But I think what they both have in common is the richness of the offering, just the sheer volume of content, the sheer amount that they're investing is substantial and clearly has paid off.
And do you think, obviously, the whole pandemic is having just a crippling effect across production and all different types of the industry. But what obviously was one of the building blocks for Netflix was some of their tentpole content, like The Crown, for example. If presumably the pandemic is going to delay some of those huge scripted shows that have really driven subscription in the past and delay it, maybe put it back 6 months, a year, maybe more. Do you think that Netflix will be able to sustain that in the face of perhaps not having those tentpole projects coming through, and then maybe the recession starting to bite and people looking at what they're spending and maybe, easy ways to stop the subscriptions?
Well, I think it's really interesting just from a content perspective. What they've done very successfully is they've diversified. So The Crown was obviously a fantastic calling card early on, but if you look at number one at the moment on Netflix, it's Afterlife, Ricky Gervais's second season of Afterlife, and they've been very good at sort of pinpointing the top writers and looking at different kinds of shows. And in the unscripted environment, Tiger King is a phenomenon. Last Dance is a fantastic series. So I think that it's going to be very tough to do this hugely grandiose scale series. But I think they've made some very clever moves into content that doesn't require that kind of massive production resource. And I think as long as they keep sort of hiring brilliant writers and as long as they keep diversifying as successfully as they have, then they should be okay.
And what do you think about the SVODs? That obviously this year was really going to be the launch of the SVODs, wasn't it? A huge sort of battleground. Everybody was expecting the launch of HBO Max, which is obviously now being brought forward, I believe, to about 4 weeks from now. Peacock is launching in July, I believe. Do you think they're too late to the party? What with the unprecedented subscriber situation? Do you think Netflix has already won?
Well, it's difficult to say, isn't it? I mean, I sort of do lean towards that. I think first mover advantage or first or second mover advantage in this area counts for a huge amount. I think the richness of the content libraries of some of the bigger SVODs is going to pay dividends. We talked about Disney Plus, obviously, but I also think that one big noisy hit show can get you on the map. So I think, an HBO is a byword for quality. And Peacock is to a certain extent as well. So I think as long as they can sort of catch the zeitgeist with one show in a way that Netflix did with The Crown that we've mentioned, then I think that they may well make an impact and do well. But it's the great question, isn't it? What is the saturation point? What is the tipping point? What is the point at which people say, actually, do you know what? Enough already. I'm paying $7.99 a month for about 3-4 different services. I don't need another one. And I wish I had that sort of ability to know exactly when that was. It does feel as if it's we're approaching it pretty fast. But as I say, the power of a noisy, innovative show is as great now as it's ever been. And if you manage to get that on your service, then that can really, that can propel you into the stratosphere pretty quickly.
And presumably A&E has been finding everybody's staying at home, everybody's watching more content. It's not just the SVODs. Your channels must also be benefiting to some extent. How are you going to keep those viewers once things come back to some sort of semblance of normality? How are you going to keep them?
Well, it's an exciting time for us. History becomes Sky History on the 27th of May. So, we join up in an even more significant way with Sky, which means extra investment. And already we've been trying to be as noisy and provocative as we can with some of our shows. Damian Lewis in Spy Wars did very well for us. Al Murray that you mentioned, Why Does Everyone Hate the English? That certainly resonated with a lot of people. And we have a series on history at the moment called Lost Relics of the Knights Templar, following these very eccentric and very interesting and charismatic collectors. So, the exciting thing is that the appetite for editorially innovative, original content has never been greater. So I think the way we keep them is, if you like, taking a leaf out of Netflix's playbook and making sure that what we do is noisy, provocative, interesting, try and get the best writers, best cameramen and best directors to do something really exciting on our channels. We are doing that. We are sort of putting our mouth where our money is, or money where our mouth is, rather. And it is paying dividends, I think, for us.
How are you dealing with the whole production shutdown from a commissioning perspective? I mean, are you still commissioning? Should producers still approach you with ideas at the moment?
Yeah, we are still commissioning. I think it's very interesting because clearly the effect of what's happening at the moment is not going to hit us until next year, because the effect of not being able to go into the summer months in particular and produce in as sort of vigorous and as widespread a way as we have been able to in the past is going to make things tough. The way we've been doing it is we've been working with our suppliers, and we have been adapting much in the same way as every broadcaster has been trying to, and so the content that we commission, been thinking very carefully about how you produce in a sort of social distancing environment, how far you can sort of go into a studio and do some of those interviews that you might have done out on location. It's really all about your ability to adapt and be flexible, and we've got some terrific suppliers, terrific producers, all of whom have been willing to sort of work with us and work through some of those issues. We have got the advantage of being I guess a cable and satellite broadcaster, reliant on a lot of content on sort of returning franchises from America, like Curse of Oak Island or like Porn Stars or whatever, means that we do have a certain amount of content ready to go. So we're not as exposed as those broadcasters which rely on live broadcasting. But it's sort of necessity is the mother of invention, and producers have been looking at ways of adapting their techniques in order to take account of what's happening, and that's been very, very welcome.
Well, we wish you all the very best in solving some of these problems that we've never really had to solve before. So from a broadcaster and producer perspective, I'm sure you're having to work closer than ever before to overcome these issues.
Yeah, we have been. I think the producers, have been quite heroic in their efforts. The suppliers, I think they're, Of course, it's tough for broadcasters, but in some ways, to an extent, we're insulated because we're dependent on subscriber revenue as well as advertising revenue. But I do think the production community have been brilliant in their endeavours to work through the various issues and come up with solutions.
Yeah, well, it's certainly a tough time to be a producer right now, that's for sure. Okay, looking at this week's developments, you identified advertising. And last week on the show, we discussed how Channel 4 are addressing the fallout from this whole pandemic on the production side, particularly with advertisers pulling huge amounts of spending, essentially cutting off their income, or the vast majority of it. Can you set a scene for us from a wider industry perspective, looking at all of these commercial broadcasters? What is the scenario when it comes to the advertising market, and what are the likely outcomes?
Well, basically, the advertising market is in free fall for not just television, but also for magazines and newspapers. And of course, this comes at a time when the commercial broadcasters would need the advertising because of all the other stuff that's going on. It's really terrible. I mean, it's to the point where I would say it's catastrophic. Advertising demand for television is cratering. I mean, Channel 4 says it's a 50% drop in April and May, and Ender's Analysis has said it's not going to recover in June. It's bad. In fact, Claire Enders at Ender's Analysis has even said that the government should start lending support to broadcasters because of this cratering of the advertising. So it's a very big thing. And what it has meant is that, and it's not just in the UK, by the way, it's around the world. I mean, the broadcasters that I follow, for example, ProSieben Sat.1, which is a commercially funded broadcaster in Germany, again, huge advertising dip. Both ITV in the UK, ProSieben Sat.1 in Germany have not only suspended their dividends, but they've also basically pulled back any kind of guidance for 2020. Because they just don't know what's going to happen with advertising. And they don't know how fast it's going to return and at what level it will return.
I mean, this is the perfect storm, isn't it, for commercial broadcasters, which will be followed by a huge depression from a consumer's perspective.
We could see certain commercial broadcasters disappearing from the landscape, and I also think we'll start to see consolidation. I mean, if you look at ProSieben Sat.1, Mediaset has already taken a run on them. They're now up to just under 25% ownership of that conglomerate in Germany. And of course, Mediaset, which is the Berlusconi empire, is trying to create sort of a pan-European commercial broadcasting group. ProSieben, up till when Max Kunz, who's the CEO, resigned about a month ago, was pushing back on that and saying, no, we don't want to do that. We just want to have an advertising alliance, not an actual merger. So I think that now all bets are off, and we could see more things like that actually happening. And I think we could see some commercial broadcasters actually leaving the fold. I think the important thing to remember is it's not what they have to figure out is what to do next, and that's the big question. Obviously they've done things like put in discounts. They're trying to they're reducing ad booking deadlines. They are getting rid of late booking fees. They're doing whatever they can to attract advertisers. But the advertisers, because they're not selling anything, are not marketing. And so it's one of these sort of vicious circles that we have to somehow get out. The light at the end of the tunnel is that the IPA, which, as you may or may not know, represents the advertising industry, basically ran a campaign in Financial Times last week. And one of the headlines I thought was fantastic was, "When others go quiet, your voice gets louder," which is, absolutely right. I mean, if there's nobody advertising, get in there and advertising because there's less people advertising. But it's really difficult for companies because they're all seeing their revenues fall. They're seeing their demand for their products fall. And they're thinking, wow, we can't pour money into marketing at this point because we don't know if anybody's going to buy anything. So it's one of these, again, as you say, perfect storms on that side of the ledger.
And it's not just broadcasters per se. Before, again, it feels like a long time ago when we were just a few months ago, but before COVID-19 hit, we saw big moves in the AVOD market with Fox buying Tubi, Comcast buying Zumo, and this week NBC Universal buying Vudu from Walmart. How do you expect developments there to play out?
Well, what's interesting about the AVOD market is, of course, after the subscription video on demand market just went crazy and everyone thought, oh, I need to do a Netflix. And so you saw everyone piling into subscription video on demand. I mean, Disney is the classic example. But AVOD was sort of left behind. Then suddenly people woke up. I shouldn't say everybody. I think that Viacom was ahead of the curve when they bought Tubi, because they bought Tubi a couple of years ago. But the point is that they bought Pluto a couple of years ago. Fox bought Tubi. So the idea that AVOD was going to sort of have a renaissance took a while to catch on. And now suddenly everybody's going, oh, this makes sense. We can basically replicate what we do in linear broadcast television, in on-demand television, and put ads there. That'll be great. It doesn't have to be all subscription funded. Because, of course, the other thing that people have talked about is what they call subscription fatigue. So in other words, how many subscription VOD services are you going to subscribe to? Well, you might do 2, maybe 3, 4, then it starts to get a little expensive. And you're thinking, really, do I have my broadband subscription? Then I have like 4 SVOD subscriptions. So the idea is that there will be appetite for AVOD. So I think that you're going to see AVOD certainly get more traction. The problem, of course, now is that we've got this advertising implosion. So the good news is that everyone believes, and certainly this is true, that you can get greater visibility on on-demand advertising. You know more about your targeting, you know more about addressability, all that kind of good stuff. So you know who you're advertising to. There's less, as we say in advertising, wastage, ads that go out and you don't even know who's seeing them, right? So that's the good news. The bad news is that we've got a lot of people coming into this space now. I mean, interestingly for me, when you look at NBCU's Peacock, that is a hybrid model. So they're going to have tiers, different tiers. So one tier is going to be a free tier to subscribers, right? They'll have advertising. Then they're going to have a $5 a month tier, which will have some ads, right? So it's sort of like, how is this all going to shake out, and how many of these AVOD services will the market be able to bear, in addition to all the SVOD services that the market already has? So I think the jury is still out, but I think that we're going to see a lot more action in the advertiser VOD space for sure.
Well, it's certainly going to be a fascinating few months, and the thought of commercial broadcasters, to your earlier point, actually disappearing off the scene altogether is going to be extraordinary. And but obviously we're in extraordinary times. So, Dan, your second story is on a survey that you saw this week on social media content. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes, I was very intrigued to know this, to look at this. I mean, this was a survey done with Generation Z, those aged 18 to 24, and I was particularly intrigued about this. It's really about their consumption of social media content and what they think of some of the stuff that they're seeing on social media. I should declare a personal interest in that. I have twins who are 19, so they're right smack bang in this Generation Z, and I have lots of lively conversations with them about what they're watching and whether or not they should be watching it. But the interesting thing is that when they did this survey, and when I say they, it's Disciple Media, it was commissioned by, and the respondents said they spent an average of 2 hours and 28 minutes each week aimlessly scrolling through poor quality content, predominantly on Facebook. I mean, that's quite a long time to be scrolling aimlessly through poor quality. Overall, respondents said they consider less than 50% of social media content to be high quality, and 43% said social media is an unnecessary distraction, with a quarter believing social media in general has a negative effect on society. Now, of course, you don't want to extrapolate too much from surveys, because the great thing about surveys is that you can sort of twist the results to almost say whatever you want. But I do think that the sort of quality arms race that we're seeing in the SVODs or in broadcasters, where we're all having to up our game, is quite interesting, because I think this will translate into social media content. And I think that, those that will be successful in the production of social media content are those who can really sort of almost mimic the same kind of production quality as you see on some of the SVODs or some of the broadcasters. It needs to be good stuff. It's no longer the sort of, if you like, user-generated YouTube kind of content. It needs to be pretty high spec. And I've just been quite interested to sort of see that play out. And this survey, if you like, is a microcosm of that.
Well, it'd be interesting to see. I mean, Quibi is obviously just launched very quietly in the UK, certainly in the UK, but not so quietly in the US. Again, great initial numbers that they've announced. Do you think that's the answer? I mean, do you think Quibi is launching at a great time?
Quibi is really interesting. I think that. I'm going to be so fascinated. The talent lineup, I mean, they're launching 175 shows, and some of the acting talent, the writing talent is just incredible. The likes of Anna Kendrick and Liam Hemsworth and Sophie Turner and Andy Garcia and Eva Longoria. I mean, and in the unscripted space, things like Murder House Flip or Punk'd or Chrissy's Court or whatever. I think I'm really fascinated to see how it takes off, and whether that sort of 10 minutes, those 10-minute episodics are proved to be as popular as clearly Jeffrey Katzenberg thinks they will be. And yes, certainly that achieves the kind of, it's sort of Netflix for short form, isn't it? So it'll be very interesting to see if they manage to pull that off. I don't honestly know if, I suppose that for me, because I'm a long form junkie, but it's not aimed at people like me. It's aimed at a different audience. So I'll be fascinated to see.
Well, I think what it was aimed at, or originally conceived for those moments, like on the bus or on the tube or in the queue for your Starbucks or whichever coffee brand that you prefer. And I think they call those in-between moments. And I wonder what sort of have we got in-between moments now? I guess we've got more time than ever to play around with this sort of content. But who knows if it's really going to be that killer app that they conceived it as.
We have to come out of lockdown to really see, because it is about travel. It is about those in-between moments, and clearly those in-between moments we're not happening nearly as often right now. I was thinking one of the other things, the other phenomenons clearly that has happened through lockdown is the growth in popularity of podcasts. And as somebody who grew up listening to the radio as much as watching television, I do think the sort of podcast, if you like, there's going to be that constituency of people who want those episodic moments on screen, the brilliant bit of scripted or unscripted via Quibi. But there equally is going to be a growing constituency of people who are going to continue to enjoy the listening experience and podcast every bit as much as vodcasts and short form.
And we've seen radio listenership go through the roof as well as all the other media consumption. So, it'll be interesting to see how Quibi gets on. I mean, I think it's a close to $2 billion investment. So it's probably the biggest bet that in Hollywood in recent history. So let's.
Which is great. You love seeing. Those figures. You love seeing people investing that amount in new services. I have to say, it's formidable.
So, Kate, we talked a little bit earlier about initial moves in terms of mergers for broadcasters. Looking at the overall mergers and acquisitions market as it is within the broadcast industry, how do you see things changing there?
Well, I think anytime there is some kind of movement in one direction, there's an opposite effect in the other direction. So right now we have a lot of commercial broadcasters, for example, under a lot of pressure. So I've already talked about ProSiebenSat.1 and how Mediaset's taken advantage of that opportunity. We saw Vivendi took a stake in Lagardère, 10.6% stake. Lagardère owns something called Lagardère Studios, which is a big production entity. So obviously that's one of their moves in there. And of course, it's interesting how Vivendi, I call them the great jugglers, because what did they do the other week? They sold a big stake in Universal Music to Tencent, got some money there, and then turned around and used some of that to buy the stake in Lagardère. So it's very interesting. I think we're going to see some of the bigger players, or what we often say in M&A, the consolidators, getting more in consolidation mode as they try to figure out, these are strategic players, trying to figure out what to do next with what they're up to. Obviously, the big deal in the UK production sector has been Banijay Group's £2 billion deal to acquire Endemol Shine, which is, taken a while to happen, but that's a big one. And I think we're going to see a continued growth of what I call the big super indie groups, the consolidated groups, whether it's Banijay or All3Media, those kind of companies that are sort of hoovering up indies that they think make sense. Even ITV has talked about buying more indies for ITV studios. Although in this climate, I think that Carolyn McCall, who's the CEO, will be very careful about how she deploys her cash, because I think she's more worried about getting stuff on screen. The other thing I think is interesting in M&A is not only are we going to see some opportunities because of what's going on, because keep in mind, production companies are in the same, particularly if you're smaller, are in the same problem. They may have had commissions. Suddenly those commissions are either stopped or delayed. So there's no money coming in. They're having to sort of hold their breath, figure out how to furlough their employee, whatever they're doing. That's going to be hard for some of these mid-sized indies and smaller indies to sustain. So I think you'll start to see more strategic buying, even if it's minority stakes, like we saw Sky took a minority stake in The Lighthouse, which of course is basically a startup from the BBC studios. There's 3 or 4 people. Hilary Salmon is the leader. So that deal started before all this happened, before the COVID-19 started to really hit. But I think we'll see more things like that, just because it's opportunistic.
So how do you value a production group right now? I mean, if you have production entities that are furloughing staff and having greenlit shows cancelled, particularly on the scripted side, having huge budget productions that may get cancelled or seriously delayed for all these reasons. And sports, if you've got production companies who are dealing with sports, for example, they're obviously in huge amounts of trouble. I mean, how would you place a value on a production group? And obviously we're going to find people looking for a bargain, but where do you place a value in a company that can't make anything?
Well, I think the point is that the value that any independent production company can get from a sale is going to go down because of this very problem you've just said, unless they have a huge library that they own the rights to. Because the pipeline of production, as we say, has slowed, stalled, stopped. So, what is it you're actually buying? So I think not. That's why. So I think that's why there's going to be more in M&A, because it's going to be cheaper, right? How do you value? It's going to be the same kind of values they've done before, but it's the multiples that you're going to be able to assess on an independent production company's revenues or forward revenues or whatever metric you're taking is going to decrease because of this work stoppage, essentially, right? Unless, as I say, they have some kind of a library. The other thing I think that we should note is we've been talking about strategic buys. So obviously, ITV Studios is a strategic buyer. All3Media is a strategic buyer. Vivendi is a strategic buyer. But you've also got what we would call non-strategic buyers, like let's say a private equity company. I think we'll see more of that. We already had one of those this year with Lloyd's Development Capital and Banijay bought into Bear Grylls' new indie. So the idea that this kind of money comes into the system as well. I think the other thing to keep in mind that even though I've talked about some of the strategic buyers taking advantage of the softening of value for independent production companies, there are some strategic buyers who are going to be in dire straits to actually have the money to do that. I mean, Endeavor is the one that comes to mind, the Hollywood-based Endeavor, who has had to pull their IPO, and they've got all kinds of problems going on there. So they had a mixed model, thinking that was the way forward. That mixed model is not looking very good under this current COVID virus crisis. So I think we'll have that too. Sort of, what is the implication of that on the buyers, not just on the sellers' values, but also on the buyers' ability to come up with money, cash, equity, whatever it is that they need. So that's why I think there might be some money coming in from the side, either private equity or some other kind of money like that.
So do we think that we might see some of the FANGs, for example, circling for a bargain with these production groups?
I think the jury's still out. Maybe this is the opportunity that they need because, as I said, I think the prices will get cheaper. But so far, we haven't seen a lot of that they seem to want to work with independent companies or do it in-house themselves. So, will they buy? I don't know. I'll tell you this. Certainly, they are going to come out of this crisis with better wallets or deeper pockets than many of the other people in the sector. So if you look at, who's cleaning up still on digital advertising, well, Amazon, Facebook, Google, they're getting, if there's any advertising going on, it's going onto these platforms, right? So will they, won't they? Yeah, I mean, maybe. I mean, it's a lot of us sort of for the past year and a half have said, oh, when are they going to make their first buy? And it's not really happened. So I'm actually glad it hasn't, because I think that in some ways, an indie working for one of those companies, it's almost like oil and vinegar. It's kind of like when the telephone companies started to buy up independent production companies. They didn't know how to deal with them. So maybe, we'll see. I think the bigger issue is, what are those social media platforms and the big tech companies buying up that are going to influence distribution for content? So for example, Facebook just this month in April bought 10% of India's Reliance Jio, which is a huge broadband, type entity in India. And why has Facebook done that? Because, of course, India is one of these huge growth markets. There's some statistic out there that says in the past 5 years, 560 million people in India have gotten access to the internet. I mean, just in the last 5 years. Facebook has more users in India than in any other country around the world. So, why are they buying into Reliance Jio? Well, they think that they're going to be able to, basically reap more revenue from that market. And one of the things I thought was really interesting about that was that Zuckerberg, who runs Facebook, said, we want to open up commerce opportunities for people in India. Now that's interesting. So this is Facebook, right? This is so commerce opportunities. So I think what we're going to see, an increasing shift by these digital platforms to get not just into distributing content and social media and, like this and whatever. It's going to be, how do we sell more stuff to people? How do we make these ads, clickable to buy? How do we become more like Amazon, if we're not already Amazon, to get more revenue out of these people who are watching this content? keep in mind when you talk about Amazon, they're not really in the content business to be in the content business. They're in that content business to sell more stuff, right? So the other social platforms are starting to get that same, idea. So I think we're going to see more stuff like that. And that has an impact, I think, on production, because what kind of stuff are they going to want? What kind of shows are they going to want? I mean, when we talked about Quibi earlier, Quibi, what kind of stuff they want is different than what Netflix wants, right? Not only is it in terms of the form or the format, the length of the show, but kind of how quickly it resonates. How, there's got to be a very quick arc, beginning, arc up, end, beginning, arc up, end. So you have this kind of cliffhanger thing in 10-minute segments. That's a very different kind of dynamic than making a show for, I don't know, a broadcaster, or even for Netflix, which is looking for binge type content. So I just think that how the M&A space, when we look particularly at what the FANGs are up to, it's not just about whether they're going to buy indie production companies. It's about what else they're buying and how that's going to impact how the television space needs to react, or television broadcasters and producers need to react in those kind of new environments.
Well, it's fascinating stuff, and I'm sure that there's going to be developments happening on a weekly basis now that's going to change our thinking in terms of the way that the industry's developed over the last 5-10 years. It's going to be pretty much upended over a space of almost 2-3 months, I guess. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that develops. So now we've reached the part of the show where my guests get to nominate their heroes of the week and who or what they want to get in the bin. Dan, who's your hero of the week?
Well, my hero of the week is a guy called Gareth Evans, who is a film director, screenwriter, editor. He is the creator of a series called Gangs of London on Sky that's just come out, and he's my hero because I did binge watch that series and over the weekend, and I did think it, of course it's like most big drama series, it's got its flaws, it's got its faults, but I thought it was terrific, and I thought it was I think Gareth is mainly known for sort of martial arts films, actually, in the Far East. And I think it's just really interesting to take some of those values and all the choreography he knows so well and apply it to a sort of futuristic Londonscape. And I just thought creatively it was really interesting. So he's my hero of the week.
All right. Well, I look forward to seeing that. I haven't made my way through Afterlife 2 yet, so that's probably next on the list. Kate, how about you? Who's your hero?
Well, I have kind of a maybe left field answer to that. I'm going to say that my hero of the week is that the gambling industry has decided to pull all their advertising from TV and radio, which I think in a lockdown period is a good thing to do. And I think that actually it's a sign that companies, in this case gambling companies, understand that advertising in this period has to be tailored to what's going on with people. And in the gambling space, of course, people are locked in their houses and doing strange things and probably over-betting on things that they shouldn't be doing. So I think it's great that they're not going to be pushing them to advertise, to gamble more with their advertising. But I think for all advertisers, we're starting to see it now. Advertising is starting to shift to kind of not just sell, but about being a good neighbor or highlighting the heroes in our community right now, whether they're NHS staff or whatever. I mean, some of the fashion magazines are putting nurses on the covers as opposed to, just, oh, here's the next Chanel bag you need to buy for £3,000, right? So I think that that's my hero. I'm using the gambling as the meeting point, but the broader theme of my hero is that, sort of the advertising agencies kind of wake up and be sensitive to what's going on in the country and in the world right now.
Well, I think we can all agree, Kate, that context is really key in days such as these. So thanks for that. Who are you going to put in the bin?
I couldn't figure out what one to do for this. So then I thought, well, I mean, I've been using Zoom so much the past 3 weeks. 4 weeks, maybe now. I can't remember how long we've been in lockdown, Justin. It's gone on interminably. But anyway, so for Zoom, the problem with Zoom is that you get these Zoom bombing things. It's only happened once to me, but I'll tell you when it happened, it was like really weird. So I think, Zoom isn't a great job, but they've gone from sort of 10 million users a day in December to 300 million users a day. I mean, it's huge for them, right? And by the way, all the other guys are starting to realize they have to catch up. So we're seeing Facebook launch this week Messenger Rooms, and we're going to see, Google Hangouts is already out there. But for me, Zoom needs to get their act together. They need to get their privacy up. They need to get rid of the Zoom bombing stuff happening. So I guess that's my get in the bin. Get your act together, Mr. Zoom.
Well, there's definitely a pattern emerging there. Chris Curtis last week nominated the bookcases in people's Zoom backdrops for his get in the bin. So it's the new normal, I guess, we're all living in. Kate, thanks so much for coming on the show.
You're welcome. Thanks very much for asking me to talk on TellyCast.
And finally, Dan, who are you putting in the bin?
Well, this is very predictable and probably quite dull, but Piers Morgan is my villain. And I know, I just think that probably almost everyone you get on this podcast he'll be in their top 5. But he has just been cleared by Ofcom of hectoring politicians. And I think the main thing for me about Piers is that everything he does appears to be driven by publicity and self-aggrandizement. There is no, despite his sort of protestations, there is no sort of no sense that he is actually questioning people for a greater good. There is only a sense that he is broadcasting in order that as many people as possible can hear the sound that he loves most, which of course is the sound of his own voice.
Well, it was. I think that's a great choice, and interestingly, I saw that apparently Donald Trump has blocked him on Twitter.
Yes,
I think I saw this week.
I saw that. Yeah,
which the world gets weirder.
It does, because the irony of that is that they're so similar. Those two, Trump and Morgan, are just so very, they're kind of perfect bedfellows. They could, they're sort of brothers from the same mother, and yet, he sort of Morgan sort of claims that the president's so enraged. I think obviously they're afflicted by the same madness, I think.
Well, Dan, thank you so much for spending some time with us this afternoon. Really enjoyed having you on the show. All the best with everything that you're doing at A&E, and hopefully we'll have you on the show again soon.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. It's been great fun. Thank you.
So now it's time to hear from Deadline's TV editor, Peter White in LA, to bring us up to date on all the latest goings on in Hollywood. How you doing, Peter?
Hi, Justin. Nice to hear from you.
You too. Great to speak to you. And I hear there's been a bit of an earthquake in the last few days going on in LA.
There was. It was only a minor one. In fact, I slept through it and found out in the morning. So good to know it didn't rock the house too bad.
Good. Well, to add earthquakes to lockdown, it's never a quiet moment in Hollywood. So at the moment, it's traditionally pilot season in the US TV industry. What's happening this year?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a bit of a strange time. We'd be traditionally packing our bags for the upfronts in New York around now. So generally, what we should have had by now is most of the networks should have renewed all the shows they were going to renew and cancelled all the shows that they were going to cancel to bring in some new shows. But actually, what's happened this year because of the shutdown, only one of these pilots was actually able to be finished. It's a Chuck Lorre show called Be Positive. Otherwise, the other 54 were never made. So the networks are now trying to figure out what to do, and whether that's to mean that they renew some of the shows that they were possibly thinking about cancelling, or whether they're doing straight to series orders for some of these pilot projects. And that's the trick over the next couple of weeks, where traditionally we would have been over to the upfronts to see the advertisers, what their take on the new slates were going to be. So it's a little bit more chaos than usual this time, trying to figure all that out.
So how on earth are they deciding what they're going to actually take to series and what's going to stay as a pilot?
A couple of the shows, or quite a few of the shows, in fact, have been handed second scripts. So, for instance, there's a CBS project from the creators of Will and Grace called The Big Bad Wolf, which stars Modern Family's Julie Bowen. And Max and David from there were telling me that they've been handed a second script, and CBS will likely make a decision as to whether that goes forward based on that. These are unlikely to be made as pilots this year, at least. Most things will either go straight to series, a little bit like the streaming model, or they'll either be cancelled or picked up next year. It's all up in the air still.
And with no advertising money out there, then obviously the whole commercial model of TV networks in America is completely up in the air.
Absolutely. The question is whether the advertisers are going to be doing these upfronts, whether there's going to be any interest for new shows. There will be a few events, but we don't really know what's on the docket right now, apart from there is an NBC Universal event happening in May, but the others are still TBC.
All right. Well, that's going to be something that's we're going to be following closely. Another thing, I mean, even amid the whole lockdown, obviously still an old traditional saying, where there's a hit, there's a writ. And I gather the lawyers are still busy. COVID-19 is not going to stop Hollywood lawyers. So what's happening? I gather there's something involving the agents going on there.
Yeah, the fight between the Writers Guild, the WGA, and the agencies is still bubbling along. This week, a federal judge dismissed much of the Writers Guild claims, particularly saying that the agencies took part in illegal group boycotts and unlawful racketeering. So this is another marker in that long-running battle. If you'll remember that all of the writers were forced to sack their agents, and this is still brewing. We haven't got to the end of it, although both sides have somewhat declared victory. The agencies particularly saying that this lawsuit has been gutted. It's something that's still going to carry on, but we'll see for how long. It depends whether the Writers Guild can keep spending. As you say, the lawyers are charging a fair bit. So it looks to be coming to a head soon.
And elsewhere, there's the wheel's still turning in Hollywood when it comes to new projects. Can you give us a bit of a lowdown on what you're seeing on that side of things?
Yeah, development wheel's still turning, as you say. This week is all about Hell, two very different projects that caught my eye. HBO developing a Hellraiser TV series, so Pinhead will be perhaps on small screen very soon. And HBO Max, its sister streamers, just optioned the Jake Tapper book, The Hellfire Club, which is both interesting projects, very different way, very different shows. David Gordon Green, who's the Halloween director, is behind Hellraiser, so they're just developing that with, in fact, Danny McBride, he of Eastbound and Down fame, one of the exec producers. I mean, I guess it's now is as good a time as any to harvest human souls. so that might be interesting. Jake Tapper's book, on the other hand, is a classic political thriller. A fictional story about a congressman in the 50s who crosses paths with the likes of Joe McCarthy and other politicians, ends up in a conspiracy. The Revenant writer Mark L. Smith is working on that. Admittedly, it's at a very early stage, but it's nice to see some corporate synergy between Jake Tapper, who fronts a number of shows on CNN and HBO Max. So yes, as TV is still being developed, whether these things come to fruition over the next 12 months will be interesting to see. But the town hasn't stopped, at least.
All right. Well, that's great, Pete. We look forward to hearing more next week on the goings on, and you stay safe.
Thanks, Justin.
Okay, it's the time of the show when K7 Media's Girts Licis takes us through some of the trends he's seen across the global TV industry. This week, Girts, you're looking at developments in those territories that are starting to reopen sets, like scripted dramas. Tell us a little bit about those.
Yes, hi everyone. Well, hopefully I have some good news, because we are starting, as Justin mentioned, to see the first signs leading back to the normality, as there are a few countries from Denmark and Sweden to as far as Australia, which are starting to reopen their TV production sets for scripted drama this week. And one thing we can tell for sure, though, is that the process on sets will look very, very different to what we have been used to, at least for now. All casting will be done remotely. The number of filming personnel is going to be strictly limited. There will be vigorous on-set health checks. Catering will be limited to pre-packed portioned food. There will be no snacks or coffee stations. Offices and common spaces will need to be rearranged. For instance, swinging doors will be installed in offices and bathrooms to avoid touching handles. And there will also be restrictions on sharing different tools like mobile phones or communal tools. And then if we look at each of the countries, in Australia, The legendary Neighbours are restarting filming this week, and male actors will have no makeup, female actors will not be touched up. There will be no physical contact between actors, including kissing, holding hands, or intimate scenes. Actors will also practice social distancing with special camera effects used to make them look closer together. And the studio space will actually be divided into 3 quadrants, with 3 production teams isolated from each other, so that in case if someone gets sick, only the group whose member is affected will be suspended and the shoot will be able to continue with the other 2 groups. And then if we move to Nordics, it is permitted to shoot in public spaces in Sweden, while in Denmark is allowed such shoots only on a case-on-case basis. For the time being, we are not likely to see scenes containing such shots like political demonstrations or church congregations or nightclubs, though smaller group scenes like, for instance, family dinners will be allowed. And it is also not recommended to cast actors at increased risk of severe illness and those who are over 70. And then when we are moving to Turkey, which is another country where filming of scripted shows is continuing, a couple of weeks ago, some drama episodes were even recorded using mobile phones held by the actors' family members. Now we are seeing them restarting shootings in sterilized locations using fixed rig, robotic cameras and tech that can be managed wirelessly. And also, after a break of just a few days, a daily soap of 15 years has returned on Nova TV in Czech Republic. It's called The Streets in the Quarantine, and it follows the beloved characters of The Streets, which is that famous drama in their everyday life now, facing the pandemics. And this show is produced on-site, but obviously also with actors obeying strict pandemic procedures.
So there's some incredible work being done by all of those production teams to produce those shows safely. But presumably it's really the brand-defining shows for the channels, like you mentioned Neighbours, that are going to be the ones that are being prioritised for the quick returns.
Yes, absolutely, certainly. Particularly for the bigger linear channels, there have been long-running shows. In many cases, it's local drama or soap that have built the backbone of the channel schedule. As we all know, almost all production has been halted for weeks now, and some of these shows have been taken off air, others still running with decreased frequency, say 2-3 episodes a week instead of 5. And I think that this lockdown period is also a test to viewers' loyalty to specific channels, since everyone has been just thirsty hunting for new shows or new pieces of information or a dose of escapism wherever they can find it at the time when they have a need for it. There is this, like turmoil. It's a bit like navigating a stormy sea in poor visibility. So I think that the first thing the channels will run to restore in their schedules will be those tall lighthouses navigating viewers back to them, these long-running, brand-defining shows. I'm not saying that all of them will return, but most of them will.
And do we think those are going to be at the expense of some other shows or newer formats?
Yes, it's very likely, I think. It's going to be a bumpy ride for the next year or two, not just because we'll see broadcasters' finances feeling the aftershock of their advertising revenue hole that they have just suddenly dropped in, but also because there are likely to be production traffic jams all around the place as the content pipelines will have dried up and the industry may just lack capacity to meet the demand. Everyone's schedules will be messed up. Filming may need to be pushed back because of unavailability of crew or talent. Top talent may need to make their choices and possibly withdraw from some projects in favor of others. For smaller productions and some smaller indie producers, it may turn out to be a particularly tough time, I think, since they are often funding the shows out of their own pockets or through loans and are relying on those shows being picked up by a broadcaster to reimburse them. And then, on top of all that, there is another area of production and relationships between broadcasters, producers, and financiers that will drastically change as a result of this current situation. And this is production insurance.
Yeah, so insurance. I've heard a lot of talk about insurance. Who's going to take the risk then in this new situation?
Oh, it's a tough one. Each new production now will face a new unknown risk, including the chance of another lockdown, unfortunately, and it is hugely unlikely that insurers will agree to cover such risks. To some extent, the coverage will re-emerge, of course, but perhaps it will be covering limited shooting blocks or cast and crew that's carrying some form of immunity certificate, maybe, but it will almost certainly not offer full protection now when insurers know what pandemics can turn into. And this means that the dynamics of liability and risk sharing will totally change. Broadcasters are going to try to increasingly insist on producers sharing the risk. And producers will need to have a shutdown contingency plan. They will have to plan in advance how they will mitigate the costs of any future lockdowns for each new production, and to negotiate the ability to suspend production in all their agreements with everyone involved with as little outlay as possible. And although generally broadcasters are still going to be in a stronger financial position and hopefully will also adapt some flexibility towards their suppliers, such as accepting delayed delivery, for instance, without penalty to producers, they shouldn't be pushed too hard as well, because laying more risk on broadcasters' shoulders will almost certainly mean fewer shows.
Well, what's certain is there's lots of negotiations to come, I'm sure, between all the various parties involved in producing these shows. And it's a probably great time to be a TV industry lawyer.
Yes, definitely.
Well, thanks for that, Girts. Some really interesting possible pointers for those territories that are still in a more severe state of lockdown. Thanks again. We look forward to hearing from you again next week.
Yes, hopefully with more positive news.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Thank you.
All right.
Take care.
Thank you, Girts. Well, that just about wraps everything up for this week's show. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please subscribe, rate it, and share it with friends and colleagues. If you want to get in touch with guest requests or advertise on the show, please email me at justin.crosby@me.com. So, thanks for listening, stay safe, and we'll see you next week for another TellyCast.